In the Alison Luderman poem, which we just heard Taryn read, the poet writes, when Janis Joplin sings, the song comes through her like a tornado, violent and perfectly formed. Luderman ended her poem with, I'll listen to Janis turn herself inside out, going right to the edge, and then landing the note anyway. And I will bow my head in respect. Life does come at us like a tornado sometimes. Life can take us to the very edge of our capacity. Sometimes with our natural, normal human fears, we flinch, we let go, we stop singing, or we lose the form. As one of the children said earlier, we run all the way out of the house. When the tornado howls and the voices in our head cry, fear, fear, it is easy to turn back. When our bodies flood with chemicals that urge us to fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and when the voices cry, fear, fear, logic, fear, it is entirely understandable that we do give in to the chemicals and the voices. It is wholly common to fight or flee or freeze or fawn, and it is relatively uncommon to feel the fear and proceed anyway. We may agree with Helen Keller that, paraphrasing her a bit, security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do human beings as a whole experience it. We may intellectually accept avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure, and we may still decide that this current danger is nevertheless one we must avoid at all costs. How do we face our fears? In the story For All Ages, we heard Eleanor Roosevelt's advice, you must do the things which you think you cannot do. When you look fear in the face, you are able to say to yourself, I lived through this horror. I can live through something else too. In other words, we practice. Today, I will share a couple stories about facing fear from my own life, and then I'll explore a practical concern that many of us probably have. Maybe we can learn together how to do the thing we don't think we can do. My first real job out of undergraduate was being a computer programmer for Cellular One in Columbus, Ohio. It was a good couple years, and eventually I left to start my own business. In my head, fear, you're being disloyal. You'll never get a job again. In my heart, I heard, this is not meaningful work. You're meant for something better. And what I learned was failure, hunger, privation, some humility, and lessons on what I needed to survive. A few years later, I moved to Chicago. A friend recommended me for a job with another cellular company, Sprint 360. And after 2 years there, I left to visit intentional communities around the United States, hopefully to find one where I wanted to stay. Again, the voices in my head, fear, fear, again with the quitting? How many bridges are you gonna burn in one lifetime? Fear. And the result was a partial success. I did find an intentional community in which I wanted to live, and I learned that my family was the intentional community I needed most. And so I moved back to Ohio and reconnected with my family and found the Unitarian Universalist Church in Columbus, Ohio, and I met and married Becky. Got a job with yet another cellular company. This pattern here. And I gave up databases to go to seminary. Fear! What, you're switching whole careers this time? Fear! Logic! You're going to jeopardize Becky's future too? Fear! And I found the path I'm on now. Maybe I have practiced a little. Maybe it is helping a little. Maybe sometimes I can say, I lived through that horror. I can do the next thing. And let's be clear, the fear is still there. The fear is still there. And I'm learning to keep singing anyway. Now, what are the fearful voices that we're hearing these days? Oh, there are plenty, I suppose. The one I want to talk about today, the one that many of us in this room are probably thinking about, is finances. Personal budgets, family budgets, budgets at work, and budgets in this congregation. Now, it is tempting to just ignore the issue and let it be someone else's problem. Denial is not just a river. But that was funny. Come on. It wasn't that funny. Okay, but still, I am proud of us for acknowledging that we do have a budget deficit and we're going to address it somehow. Now, when facing a deficit, a common human approach is, you guessed it, fear. Many of us are probably hearing, fear, fear, circle the wagons, shrink, cut. Hold on for dear life, fear! This is normal. And what we need now, not reacting out of fear. That's not always the optimal strategy. Let's see some counterexamples of that. Looking at UU congregations in Indiana and nearby. I don't have the full story of all these congregations, but I think we can see some patterns and commonalities. Down through history over and over, it just makes logical sense to safeguard the building, to preserve the endowment fund, to not risk the congregation's assets on some bold and or foolish chance. And eventually, the congregation ends up owning a building, maybe preserving enough of an endowment to repair the building once in a while their membership shrinks and their influence in their community wanes, and they have less and less of an impact on the injustices around them. A couple hours east of here is the Universalist Church of Lyons, Ohio. They have a nice building. They own it. There's a gorgeous stained glass window in that building, and they boast 28 members. Size is not everything. Size does help in some ways. Solely here in Indiana, more or less alphabetically, the UUA.org lists these according to what we reported in January. Bloomington has 550 members and 2 ministers, one of those currently in interim. In Columbus, Indiana, there's 109 members and a full-time minister. That's our closest sibling in size. Elkhart has 81 members. They're seeking a half-time minister. Evansville has 42 members, no minister. Fort Wayne has 118 members, no minister, although they are advertising for a half-time interim. In the Indianapolis area, there is All Souls with 208 members and a full-time minister. Heartland in Carmel, 52 members, no minister. Oaklandon, 25 members, no minister. The UU Community Church of Hendricks County, 70 members, no minister. UUII has 219 members and a full-time ministerial position. Their minister and their DRE have both left to go to a different church out east. They'll probably find an interim minister. And Kokomo has 19. Muncie has 151 members. They just signed a developmental ministry contract with the Reverend Dr. Joel Tishkin, who preaches at lots of UU congregations. He is not a UU. He is not in fellowship with the UUMA, but he's a minister. Terre Haute, 62 members, no minister. West Lafayette, which is actually the UU Church of Tippecanoe County, 125 members and a full-time minister. Of the 16 congregations in Indiana, 8 of the smallest ones have 81 members or fewer. The 8 largest have 105 or more. That's a 30% leap from the bottom tier to the top tier. And the main difference? The presence of a minister. Now, correlation is not causation. I hear Becky at home screaming that at the Zoom screen. I'm not saying a minister guarantees growth. But the statistics show 7 of the 8 largest congregations in Indiana have at least one full-time minister, the others looking for a half-time position, and only 1 of the 8 smallest Indiana congregations currently has a minister. Elkhart's trying to get a half-time one, but they don't have one now, and I'll say more about Hobart in a moment. Now, I've seen a couple times where the remaining members of a declining congregation see what's happening, and at the very end, they occasionally resort to this Hail Mary attempt. They spend most of their endowment in a last gasp attempt to get a vibrant minister and turn their fortunes around. Our sibling congregation in Hobart, Indiana, currently has 78 members. They have had a half-time minister for decades. When I served that congregation a dozen years ago or so, a generous donor paid for most of my salary there. They asked me to stay on, and they were willing to use their endowment to pay my salary for as long as it lasted, or until they grew enough to include a full-time minister in their operating budget. We got a consultant from our UUA who recommended against this proposal. They said the structures of the congregation's finances did not look healthy enough for such an attempt. And they noted that while ministers may attract visitors, it's the congregation that must welcome and retain the visitors. The consultant offered a cautionary tale of the nearest congregation to Hobart, the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Park Forest, Illinois, just across the border. Congregation in Park Forest had been declining for years when they chose to spend the bulk of their endowment for a 1-year contract with a full-time minister. 1 year was not enough time to turn around the habits of weary congregants. After that 1-year experiment, they had no minister and not much of an endowment anymore. This last January, that congregation reported 55 members. And a decade later, the First Unitarian Church of Hobart has decided that their best bet is to at least try full-time ministry again, which is why they're the only Indiana congregation with 81 or fewer members that has a full-time minister. And I sincerely hope that their experiment works, because they are lovely human beings. All of which is to say that fear is a liar, and a desperate last gasp attempt is likely to, I'll start that whole thing over again. It was so cool to start with. A desperate last gasp attempt is less likely to succeed than some creative solutions that are begun earlier in the congregation's lifetime. And that's the third approach to what we do with a deficit. Not denial, not giving into fear, but feeling the fear and finding creative solutions anyway, while we can. Maybe we make judicious cuts for sure, and we find ways to grow and branch out. Maybe we find ways to expand without cutting and co-create enough growth to grow and thrive well into our 100th anniversary. The good news is there are many potential solutions out there. We can do more fundraising from outside the congregation. Other than the concerts that Jim Ward presents, we haven't had fundraisers that primarily focus on people outside our congregation. I have heard people talk about some really good ideas recently. Let's not listen to the voices of fear. Let's take bold action. And we can do some fundraising within. We can do it better. We have not had a robust stewardship campaign since before the pandemic. We haven't had consultants in to talk about how to do that since before the pandemic. In a very real way, we have not yet begun to fight. How many of you have noticed that we have a much higher profile these days on Facebook? Many of us. We have a vibrant marketing committee now. Dr. Louise, that's my name for her, not hers. Please don't blame her for only having a PhD. That is a lot of work. Louise is doing so much work with that Facebook page. Give her a little more time and a little more cooperation from us. Who knows what's going to happen? And we are already growing at least as rapidly as we have in 5 or 6 years now. We've got new members of all ages. We've got new families with young children, which is critical for success. Let's keep that momentum going. Another approach we might take is to leverage our biggest asset, this gorgeous building. We could share our space with some of the group. Temple Bethel approached us. It didn't work out when they were forced to move, but they looked at this building. We could find some other organization to share expenses, or we can work more on renting this space. When we moved in, we planned to have lots of weddings in this gorgeous room and lots of meetings in that conference room over there. And then we got busy doing all the things and didn't really pursue either of those things very well. We could still do that. There are many ways we can move forward in this congregation. I've got one particular pet idea in mind. But before I tell you that, let's revisit Eleanor Roosevelt's advice from Our Story for All Ages. When you look fear in the face, you are able to tell yourself, I lived through this horror, I can take the next thing. Practice. To help get us out of the fight, flight, freeze paralysis, allow me to remind us of some moments of bravery from our past. 71.5 years ago, 50 people committed to support this fledgling community with their time and their money, and we are still here living their dream today. 15 years ago, the congregation finally sold the old building and moved out. Again, we ended up here with lovely grounds and a serene memorial garden. Even more recently, there was a flood in this sanctuary. That wall right there, there's water pipes in that thing. That's why that beautiful wooden thing is there, because it burst the wall, filled this place with water. The furnace quit downstairs in December. This congregation collected $11,000 in 1 month and found creative solutions to finance $100,000 for new furnaces. Finally, the story of Ibrahim Parlak, who was granted asylum in this country in 1991, but has for some reason been threatened with deportation and likely torture and death in Turkey by various U.S. government institutions since 2004. Dale Gibson and this congregation is one of several that helped raise money to pay Ibrahim's legal fees. When things came to a crisis several years ago, our board members held a special meeting. They knew the congregation had not authorized such a move. They knew it would be risky to the congregation and to their own positions as elected leaders. So we were all surprised and proud when the trustees voted to offer this building as sanctuary to Mr. Parlak. He declined the offer and fortunately won his court case. But we have, as a congregation and as individual members, faced our fears numerous times. We have done hard things. We have looked fear in the face. We can take on the next thing that comes along. Now the big finish, this cool idea. How many of you have been to a music festival sometime in your life? Several of us. My favorite festival up in Michigan has 3 stages: a shopping area, a food area, and a kids area. Whenever you decide to walk over, there's at least a couple things going on that are interesting and that are fun and or nourishing. What if we treated church like that? What if we held First-a-Palooza on the first Sunday of each month from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.? We'd have coffee hour the whole time. People have been talking about having coffee hour as a bigger focus. We could do this. We could hold the normal worship service twice at 10:30 and at 3, have a talk-back session in the conference room after the first service. We would have religious education and childcare and art the whole time, including Dungeons and Dragons or some other role-playing game, and OWL, Our Whole Lives Sexuality Education. Maybe we make that free for members and charge a little bit for people outside and make a little money on it. It's such a good thing, we should be offering it for free. This is an idea. There's lots to be fleshed out. We could still have the adult forum and great discussions and rent the space to other groups. We could have the humanists come. One month, part of First-a-Palooza could be a pagan ritual. Another month could be a humanist discussion. And another month could be a Christian thing. We could hold Tai Chi sessions or yoga or Reiki. There could be silent meditation, and there would definitely be singing somewhere in the building several times each day. Book clubs, movie discussions, social justice events. We could write letters to our elected officials, or go even bigger, gather here, go do some justice making out in the company, and come back here and have snacks and debrief. We could rent space to brain layer books and have a little book store in the corner. We could have music and dance recitals. We could have a parish nurse and provide medical care for free. Obviously, there would be an open mic time. We could pay a bit and feature professional musicians right up here for half an hour on the first Sunday each month. And the acting ensemble could hold readings and performances here. And that's just scratching the surface. It would take a lot of volunteers and a fair amount of money. But wouldn't it be exciting? And that kind of bold action might attract more volunteers. This sort of tornado of activity could garner some press and might even show other congregations how to turn around their fortunes. Money, if the congregation directed the board to spend a mere 5% of our endowment fund, that would underwrite the entire year of First-a-Palooza easily. And we might grow so much in that time frame that we could afford a full-time minister, a part-time religious educator, and pay some back of that endowment. Okay, got excited? Deep breath. First-a-Palooza is just an idea. We don't have to do this. We need not try anything like it. There are many creative ways to answer the chorus of fear in our heads. Let us not allow those fearful voices to dissuade us from what we know is right. Let us rather feel the fear and proceed anyway. So may we be. And one of the ways that we proceed, of course, is by volunteering, by giving our